The board has been in an executive session on collective bargaining and then a work study on the budget status report. And if you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I'd like to point out that Director Gallinger is absent tonight, and Director Moraldo, although she's not at the table right this minute, will be back in just a second and join us for most of the meeting. All right, so we are at public comment. This is an opportunity for public comment on issues not scheduled for public comment on the meeting agenda. Items that are scheduled for public comment tonight include the monitoring report EL11 discipline. All other public comments should be given now. Clearly state your name and school attendance area. Limit your comments to 2 minutes. We will be using a timer to help you with that. The board neither endorses nor censors any opinions expressed in public input. Please keep comments civil and respectful. No comments or applause from the audience, but feel free to wave hands to show support of the speaker. So we'll start with those that have signed up here in the room. And then Stephen, you can let me know if there's anybody who's raised their hand on Zoom. So the first one in the room is Larry White. So if you'll go to the microphone and make sure to state your name and attendance area.
My name's Larry White, or Lauriston White officially. I was a employee at Issaquah Middle School and a coach at Issaquah High School. The reason why I'm here is I was terminated because of my response to a student repeatedly calling me. And I'm trying to understand, and I'm incredibly upset because I don't know if I should be more upset about the student, his ability to call me that, or the school district's treating me like that during the course of this process. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking. Next up is Leah. Oh, yeah, wave hands if you'd like. Yeah. Next up is Leah Swanson.
I'm Jim Swanson. I'm speaking.
I'm sorry, say your name again.
Jim Swanson.
Jim Swanson.
Yeah, it's definitely. She signed me up. I wasn't here yet.
Okay.
My son feeds into Issaquah High School. I'm here to support Larry for it seems to me is a pretty wrongful way of terminating someone. And I don't understand why you guys would do that. He's coached my oldest son, who's in college now. Has coached my younger son. And you really have got rid of a nice, great coach. And we don't understand why. I'd like to see you guys readdress this and figure out how you're going to solve the problem where you're going to punish a good guy versus some kid who's that's it.
Thank you for speaking. Next up is Mackenzie Wilmot Wade.
Hello, my name is Mackenzie Wilmot Wade. I am a junior at Issaquah High School and the vice president of the IHS Thespian Troop 8397. I am back again today to invite you to Issaquah High School's production of the Laramie Project. In front of you, there should be a card, which I really hope you read and keep as a written reminder of everything I've said today. I would like to start by thanking you for your time at the last school board meeting. We really appreciate having a platform to voice our thoughts and our opinions. Second, the Laramie Project. We want you there. There are 4 opportunities to see the show, November 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th at 7 p.m. in the Longman Performing Arts Center at Issaquah High School. The show is about the town of Laramie, Wyoming, after the brutal beating and murder of a gay University of Wyoming student, Matthew Shepard, on October 12th, 1998. Yesterday marks the 24th anniversary of Matthew Shepard's death. The Hate Crime Prevention Act, passed in 2009, was dedicated to Matthew Shepard, and while his death helped make change in this country, we can't forget how Matthew was a person who dealt with struggles just like us. That's why we're doing this show. Reading through this script was the first time I had ever heard of Matthew Shepard. These are the kinds of things our history class don't teach. This show has helped me and many of our cast learn how to navigate hard conversations and potentially uncomfortable situations. And it has taught me invaluable skills in dramatic acting. Superintendent Talyik, I know part of your first 100-day plan is to engage with students. This is an amazing opportunity too. We would love to have you and the entire board there, as well as anyone else present today. Please come and see what we've created and why we fight so hard for our department. If you do come, and please say hi. We would love to know that you're there and we would love to be your friends. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And we do all have the invitation up here. I appreciate it. I'm going to just mention that the board is at a WASDA conference in Spokane 3 out of the 4 nights this is showing. So we will all put our, I know. And I even feel this because years back when my own daughter was in the play that was at this exact time, it was very difficult because I only got to see it that Saturday night. So we all have your invitation and we'll see what we can do on the one night that we're all in town. Thank you. All right, Stephen, is there anybody on Zoom that would like to give input? So there's one person. Oh, thank you. I cannot read that name.
Tammy Chris.
Thank you. Okay, Cami, you can go ahead and are you unmuted?
I think so.
There you are. You are unmuted. So go ahead and state your name and attendance area and go ahead and give input. Thank you.
My name is Cami Kress. I live in the Sunset attendance area and I also work at Sunset Elementary. I'm a 3rd grade teacher and I just wanted to share at public input a positive thing. The one-to-one implementation of laptops in 3rd through whichever grade is the upper end. I teach 3rd, but it has been a huge game changer in my classroom. I've heard other elementary colleagues express similar thoughts. It is amazing to be able to have all of our students working on a project and not have to coordinate sharing a laptop cart with different teachers throughout the school. My class recently finished our social studies unit and was able to offer students multiple digital tools for sharing their project, and they were thrilled to be able to use PowerPoint. And everyone was able to get it done in a reasonable amount of time. During math and reading, being able to have students getting lessons on different online programs while I'm working with other small groups is also really helpful. So just wanted to share a positive impact from the way that some of the levy money was used.
Great. Thank you very much for your input. Appreciate hearing that.
Mhm.
Okay, unless there's anyone else. And there were hands waving in the back of the room. I like that. Even you guys can wave. All right, that concludes our public comment. And now we are on to approval of the consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
Right. All those in favor of approval of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that passes unanimously. There you go. That one is done. Are there any changes to the regular agenda? All right, then we are good to go. All right, first up is a review of the work study. Right before this meeting, we had the opportunity to meet with much of the cabinet and staff over the work that primarily Martin Turney and Mariah Banasek did on the new formatting of the budget status report. We went through it section by section so we could understand it. There's a lot more narrative in it that talks about what the funds are that make it, well, a lot more readable to us and to the community that might be taking a look at it. I thought it was very nicely formatted. I'm really looking forward to having that now when it does roll out to being our official version to be there. So any other comments from the board?
Just that I particularly liked the reformatted capital projects report. It gives us information about where the project ended up as compared to the original project budget. And of course, there are a whole variety of reasons that those things change. They aren't all bad. Sometimes we increase the scope, sometimes we find unexpected challenges, and sometimes things can go over budget. But it's a lot more informative to what I'm looking for. So I really, really like that. We gave them a handful of suggestions, but overall, I think it's pretty close to what we want. So I'm really pleased.
Good. Director Mullings.
Yes, so as a big fan of the Guide to Understanding the Budget, I appreciate the way that it goes through in common language explaining what are the components of the budget of the district, which is quite complex. And so what I like quite a bit about this new version of the budget report is that I feel like it combines some of that information, basic information about the different categories of the budget and what they're for, as well as more narrative of what is actually happening in a particular budget category. So I think that's it's a good update.
Great.
I was going to say, for me, it's a matter of we're financially responsible for the district, right? This is the biggest thing that we as school board members do. And so having it in a way that is concise, readable, understandable, allows us to be able to do our job in the manner in which the public is seeking us to do it in. And so I do appreciate the clarity that it provides, especially around some of the other funds.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it makes it more readable for us and more readable for the general public that takes a look at it, and it helps them understand what information we are gleaning from it. Anything you'd like to add?
I just want to say thank you to Mariah Banasek for leading the charge and making these updates and having a clear vision for that, supported by Martin Turney, and also the communications team and Alicia Engels for making sure that we also could bring some of our up-to-date images that reflect our current student population and universe. Was very helpful. So thank you to the team.
Great. All right. All right. Now on to monitoring report EL 11 discipline, and we'll start with a motion.
I move the board accept the annual internal monitoring report for EL 11 discipline as presented.
Second.
All right. So I know that there are quite a few changes in this, so we would love to have you take us through what you would like us to focus on, and then we can open it up to questions from the board as we go through this.
Great. I'm gonna Steve, I'm just checking my audio because I keep moving my. Okay, great. So I'm going to hit some highlights versus to go chronologically through the content of the report itself. And I wanted to start with some context, which is that this is our, the 2021 to 2022 school year is a year that we are monitoring. And that was the first full year reviewing discipline as a concept for in-person learning. And that's notable not only because of the COVID year interruption or COVID years of interruption, but also because the discipline laws changed in 2019 to take effect for the 2019 to the 2020 school year, to go from a more intervention and support approach instead of a consequence and disciplinary approach. So I really want to say that this is almost like a new baseline for us to use moving forward and to start to compare our progress against. Last year was also a different year because we had to also ensure we were supporting the classroom culture through the level of looking at mitigation strategies to prevent the spread of COVID. So there were other aspects of how we were looking at student culture, interaction, and so forth that is just a contextual factor. So some highlights that I wanted to share about how we've approached the monitoring report for last year as presented tonight. First and foremost, we looked at it through the lens not just of physical safety, but also psychological safety. That is for our work and what we see across what our students need, oftentimes a very important component to making sure our students feel like they belong and that they are affirmed in their identity and that they feel like they can be their best selves and engage in classrooms productively for learning. Our interpretation has changed to reflect a stronger prominence and importance emphasis, or an emphasis on the importance of ensuring our students are just feeling like they can learn, and that we remove barriers that prohibit that. In addition, you'll also see greater emphasis in our interpretation as well as in our monitoring evidence to address and promote inclusive schools, in particular with a focus on equity. And much of the feedback that we heard from the board also was around what kind of education, training, and one of the student representatives mentioned this specifically, how do we make sure that we are communicating and promoting the expectations for our students as they engage in learning, as they interact with each other, and as become healthy citizens in our society. There's another aspect of the that we address also in our monitoring report to address trauma specifically, and also digital safety as well. So those are some additional changes. I will just highlight that as the team was reviewing this monitoring report and reflecting on last year, we did go into the data, and we will commit to continuing to have regular data reviews, because discipline data and how our students are experiencing our school is real time. And we can actually see patterns and trends more immediately. So we have a commitment to, on a more regular basis, talking about that in real time. And knowing that disproportionality is the biggest priority for us to focus on as it relates to the experience of different populations in our school system, and how there might be more incidences occurring with certain populations, specifically by race and ethnicity. And that overlays with other demographic factors as well, but like program enrollment, such as special education, English language learners, et cetera. But the focus for us will really be on how we address the disproportionality for our students of color. And I will share that the board had noted potentially adjusting and thinking about the concept of equitably versus consistently in the board value statement. And we talked quite a bit around that, and really found that it's important to think about the consistent application of our expectations and our training, but that we are looking at the lens, or looking at our data and the experience of our students through the lens of equity. And I know that this will be something that will be a healthy part of our conversation as we continue to look at on an annual basis our different executive limitations and governance policies. So that's really the update from me. And our team is here and has put a lot of good time into really reflecting it and reflecting changes based on the interpretation, and also frankly making it a more concise report, as well as listing an order of priority within each section where we've seen, both the first and secondary efforts that we were making, but also the areas where we were taking an approach where most students are getting all of our students are getting that particular support or notification of what we expect. That's it.
All right, well, thank you. I know a lot of work went into this because there was quite a bit of an update on the interpretation and the data that was included in this. So I will open it up to the board for questions, comments, discussion. Director Molly.
So highly appreciate the more concise format. So thank you for that. Report's readable and I understand it. I think one of the things you just mentioned is maybe it'd be helpful for me is I see the current law, but I'm not as familiar with how it differs from what it was before. So if there's like 2 minutes on that, then we could just talk about what is the difference and what are maybe some of the focus areas, because I'm actually out reading the WAC now, but it doesn't really say like how it's evolved between the two.
Yes, so I'm going to invite Andrea Zier up to talk about that,
Okay.
some of the changes, and to highlight that.
That would be very helpful.
Executive Director of Secondary High Schools.
Hi, Andrea Zier, Executive Director of High Schools. There are quite a few changes. Some of them were small nuance. I'm just going to kind of go over like the big ones that I think had the biggest impact. The first biggest change was that prior to receiving any exclusionary discipline, so there are kind of a couple categories of discipline. There is non-exclusionary discipline, which would be anything where a student isn't being like suspended or expelled and removed from a classroom setting. So non-exclusionary discipline would include things like a lunch detention, a Saturday school, a conference with an administrator and a parent together to talk about how to better handle a situation next time. So anything that is not taking a student out of a class. Exclusionary discipline is short-term suspension, long-term suspension, or expulsion. The biggest change in the discipline laws was that prior to issuing any exclusionary discipline, you first have to attempt to do other forms of discipline before jumping straight to exclusionary discipline. So the first offense of a behavior for a student needs to be treated in a way that's more coaching and restorative than it is punitive with removing them from the academic setting. That was the largest change that had the biggest impact. I will say the law does call out specific things. So if a behavior is criminal in nature, that is the one exception where you would go to exclusionary discipline. So things like weapons, distributing drugs or alcohol, not use, but distributing, really any weapons, assault. So things, and the law specifically calls that out. So that would be, I think, the biggest change. The other largest change in the law is that a parent, the student needs to have an informal conference before discipline is issued, and the parent is allowed to be present for that informal conference or informal hearing is actually the language in the law. So previously, if you had evidence, let's say video surveillance, that's pretty clear about something that happened, or student is maybe in possession. I'm trying to think of easy examples. And there's really not, you have quite a bit of evidence. You could make a determination pre-2019-20 that something occurred if you had enough evidence and issue the discipline. Now with the new laws, the student gets an informal hearing where they have a chance to discuss what occurred, their side of the story, and they are allowed to be invited to have parents present during that informal hearing before any decision is made on what the level of discipline is. They cleaned up a little bit around emergency expulsion language. Emergency expulsions used to be treated more like a placeholder for administrators to buy themselves time to be able to complete an investigation. If they thought that there was evidence to believe that a student was going to receive discipline. Now, emergency expulsion should not be used as a placeholder to conduct an investigation, but it should only be used in circumstances where there's an immediate concern of safety. And so to remove the student while they create a plan for it to be safe for the student to return, whether that's a safety plan, whether that is an investigation to really make sure that they know what happened. So those are, I think, the significant 3 changes to the law.
Thank you. Other, do you want to add anything? No. Okay, yeah. All right, Director Weaver.
It's on. This is kind of more of a comment or wondering than anything that would necessarily need to be changed. But I notice in number 3, where we talk about may not permit any unruly behaviors to disrupt learning. And it's very clear in the verbiage that we're talking about things that happen in school, at school sponsored activities on the bus. And I know that we have also had instances where things happen outside the school on a student's own time on their own social media, but it somehow finds its way back into school and creates a disruption. And I know from the legal conferences that Director Moore and I have attended that the Supreme Court is getting, or the courts are getting weird and squirrely about whether or not things that happen out of school actually constitute a disruption of in-school learning. And I'm not sure anything needs to change here, but I kind of wanted to bring it up because I know it's an area of the law that's fuzzy, and I know it's very frustrating to parents in both directions. When something happens outside of school, it explodes on social media, and should the kid be disciplined? Should they not be disciplined? And how does that work? So I just kind of wanted to bring that up because it isn't really addressed in there at all. And I don't know if it needs to be, but.
Thank you for bringing up. It is an area that I know that has generated lots of discussion in lots of different spaces. One of the very specific changes that we made to the interpretation was to acknowledge that while this is in-class behaviors, there's things that happen in between parts of the transition of the school day, whether it's in person or also virtually, that do affect a student's ability to show up into a classroom. So we very specifically named that in section 3, citing, I'll just read the sentence. I'm defining unruly or disruptive behavior as activity that prevents a student from being able to fully participate in class, whether this is due to any known in-class behaviors or due to interpersonal interactions in person or virtually during the day. Because we know when there is a issue at lunch potentially between students where there might be some, physical kind of interaction where that's not, people don't leave that positively. They still have with them as they go to their class that immediate reaction to what might have just happened or what they might have witnessed. The same might be true with cell phones. So in some cases I see cell phones are put away right at the beginning of classes, so they're not available during class, but there are times when things happen in the middle of the day where cell phone use can sometimes also generate a kind of, oh my gosh, this just happened and there's a reaction to that. So we were defining it kind of in the school day, and that's why we added some of the digital safety components to our monitoring evidence to ensure that we are teaching our students how to navigate successfully use of technology, social media, and what cyberbullying actually is, and that is part of the universe. So we're acknowledging that it exists, but trying to and show the supports that we put in place, as well as know that that there is, yes, outside of the school day, matters do happen that interfere with potential learning, and we have to sort of uncover that and acknowledge that exists, but we will handle that as it comes up during the school day.
And I noticed and while we're on number 3, it's interesting, we say the superintendent may not permit any unruly behaviors to disrupt learning. But of course, we know there are disruptions there are behaviors that end up disrupting learning. So the key is your very last sentence of that interpretation, which is really that those instances of unruly or disruptive behavior by any person to remain unaddressed, right? It may have, it's inevitable, it will happen, but it's how it's addressed. And then students and classrooms worked with to, prevent additional disruptions to the classroom, right? So to me, that was important to recognize. Yeah, and I thought in general, there was a lot more of a focus on this instead of just the discipline and the outcome of discipline, but a focus on a safe environment. And we get to a safe environment by consistently enforcing the rules and consequences. And to me, that came out nice and strongly. And I appreciated too that we've started adding the board value at the beginning of the monitoring report, because that very first little paragraph that said the board believes and on is the board value and why we have EL 11 discipline.
And just to tag on to what you're saying, I felt reading this whole general interpretation that it was just somehow blending better with that board value, that it was addressing, as you said, it's addressing the value rather than the discipline itself. It's how do we get our student environment to be the place we want it to be. So I liked it.
And Director Mullings.
So I agree with all the kind of interpretation and formatting things. I think the challenge we still have is that the data bears out disproportionality, right? So, and so I think that's really the nature of what's in the report. I will always state that's what brought me to this work, the disproportionality and discipline in our system, and clearly why I stay. So I think for me, it really becomes so what are we actually going to do about that part? Because we're at year over year of still showing that we have We are significantly over suspending based on the population of a given race. Like if you look at our Latino and Hispanic students who are 10% of the population being suspended 24% of the time. Our Black students who are 2% of the population being suspended 14% of the time. So, you know, we can reformat it, which I like, and we can talk about it, but I guess what I still need to understand is what are we doing about it?
Thank you for bringing that up. That is a top priority for me and for our executive directors who oversee schools. It is, I know, a top priority for our school principals and building leaders as well. As I shared earlier, we believe we should be meeting on a more regular basis to look at this data. And we're going to be putting into place some of those mechanisms, including maybe different reporting systems from our student and SIS teams to help support those conversations. So we are step one, doing more to engage with the data, and that will generate a more problem-solving focus in the moment in real time. And I hope to be able to add some of those details and data points as needed if we want to go deeper with a work session at any moment in time to talk about disproportionality, but also in next year's monitoring report.
So I just have to say this out loud. We know the students of color in each one of these buildings. We don't need to look at the data to know when they consistently show up in the office and they're consistently disciplined. What I'm hoping for is something much more proactive, which is those assistant principal, whoever has a dean of student responsibility becomes on a weekly and monthly basis accountable for looking what comes across their desk and working with the people who work in their buildings to do something different. I do not want to have this conversation in a year. I understand we will do it. I just don't want to be this frustrated when we get there. And so for me, what I'm hoping for is that we can outline something very specific and proactive. I've worked in corporate America a long time. People look at D&I data all the time. And I say, you don't need D&I data to look at your team and see what's the representation and to take some action against it. So what I am begging is that someone takes an individual accountability in each of these buildings to look at the students who are being disciplined and make different choices.
Director
Um,
Maraldo.
So thank you, Director Mullings, for speaking out on this. I too came back to the numbers still aren't very different. They are different from when I first started because for 3 years, as I sat on this board and asked for this information, I didn't get it. And then our previous superintendent took over and knew first time, I'm going to get this data. And at that point, our African-American students were 28% of the suspension. So I have seen some changes, but that's been over 10 years now. So I agree that how long do we have to wait for it to be something where we try a different approach? Because I think our in-school suspensions, some of the other interventions have been different approaches. But I'd really like to hear from students. I think most of our schools now have equity club where, we've had as boards, we've had conversations with specifically students of color where we've welcomed them to have conversations with us. What can we do as a board and as a school system to really get at some of the heart of this? And is it what is our relationship with the students, like you said, that keep showing up? Because my biggest wondering is still number of students with suspensions. I think those are individual. So it's not how many, it's not there were 46 suspensions. There were 46 students. Some of them might have been suspended or disciplined multiple times. So we know who our reoccurring visitors are to the dean's office or the assistant principal's office. So what can we do relationally that will be different? Superintendent?
So thank you for continuing to ask about what we're doing proactively. I'm happy to share a few high level, and I would also want to invite team members up to share as well. For the purpose of the monitoring report, I was looking at the lens of the data, right? And as well as the reporting and the cycle that which we're doing that, but also previewing that our team is committed to getting at this. Like the board asked me to highlight the number one priority. And we did that in this monitoring report because we feel it just as urgent as you do. In my mind, we do. We know that we can put the names against these students. Now, can't do that publicly. No, I know, but I say that just for the public to be reminded of that. And we also know that there are students that are involved with more incidences. As you pointed out, Director Moraldo, there are students that are involved with many more cases or incidences that we know we need to address. We do have support systems and tier 1 systems in place. We have teams that meet that look across the various issues that come out throughout the day. MTSS teams look at our students who are in need of the most critical interventions. We are employing a new threat assessment protocol. We also are really deeply thinking about how do we partner with other organizations to specifically address hotspot areas where there might be a lot of activity. And I would invite, there have been some aspects of, some of the work underway. I'm going to ask Sherry and maybe Andrea to come up and share a bit about how they've been partnering together. I'll ask Sherry to kick off in particular because as the executive director of middle school who is new to our system, she also brings different ideas as well from prior work working in Seattle Public Schools. So you can share some of those details of how you've been working with some of the building leaders to really support our students.
Sure. I'm Sherry Cox, Executive Director of Middle Schools, and I'm going to give a really concrete example before I kind of lead in, and it kind of comes from our work together as we're looking specifically at IMS and IHS and how those two systems interact together and maybe not always in the way that best supports, at least from my perspective, the middle school students. And so one of the things that happens every single day to set our students up for what I consider probably a less than successful start to their school day from middle school perspective is that they get to school and they sit on a bus for 20 minutes. Imagine sitting on a bus for 20 minutes when you are an 11 to 13-year-old and what's happening inside your body. And then they move from the bus into a crowded cafeteria where they wait another 10, 15 minutes for the bell to ring to be able to move out to their classes. They do this at the beginning of the day and they do this again at the end of the day. And to me, that's an adult systems error. We're not setting our students up at Issaquah Middle School to be successful in that environment. And so one of the things that I've done in partnership with Andrea and in partnership with Martin and Jason and some others in the room is, well, what would it cost us to run buses that don't have middle school kids and high school kids at that specific site? Equity is about doing what's needed at a specific site. We're not having these problems at Maywood and Liberty. We're not having these problems up at Skyline in those schools. And so looking just at this school, we're trying to calculate the dollars, the additional staffing, et cetera, that it would require to separate the two bus systems. Or maybe they can ride together in the morning and we would move, which I believe would require your support, we would move the start time of Issaquah Middle School to be the same as Issaquah High School. So we're really looking kind of systemically at what kinds of things that are currently in place that are not supporting our students to start their day or end their day successfully. And so that's just a small example of we're not doing it differently right now, but we're considering it and there will be a cost to it. And so we just have to weigh those things. I don't know, Andrew, if you have anything to add.
Andrea is your Executive Director of High School. I think I would just add a lot of this stuff is going to be more for this summer and heading into this school year than it was as much for last year. But along that same, I'll just carry on with the IMS IHS feeder pattern. We've noticed that within the data, as well as just like feeling the day-to-day experience, that a lot of the discipline is focused and centered around peer conflict. And some of that peer conflict is actually happening in our neighborhoods, but then spilling over into the schools or at the community center after school and the garage area where a lot of students are hanging out. And so we have been creating an intentional partnership to talk a little bit more with the garage, as well as some of the folks at the community center, as well as partnering with our own people in the district, student interventions, things like that, to bring in some supports for those families to talk about how can we help get them the resources they need in terms of not having peer conflict that just continues to spill into the school. So we had a parent night that was our wonderful equity department helped facilitate with some of our Latinx parents and families that are involved to try to avoid anything leading to school discipline this year. And then there's another partnership with Rashad, who we've used in the past, who's wonderful with our families coming up soon. We also proactively this school year had, I appreciate Director Molling saying like, we know who these students are. We had proactive, what we would call tier 2, tier 3 meetings with some of these families to try to create some proactive relationships with the building administrators to really just dig into the student, like, hey, let's have this be a strength based, like, what are you good at? What do you want to do? Like, what are your post-high school goals? How can we support you as a family? Like, so there's a student, family, and school partnership where we can be in more regular communication to make sure that you have what you need to feel a sense of belonging, to access your classes and things like that. So all of our administrators proactively met with all of their what I would consider tier 3 students that have like repeat discipline offenses or significant attendance this summer to try to partner with their families. And then the last thing I'll add, just to try to be brief, is that which Superintendent Talia alluded to, is that the partnership with the ed directors, we are going to be working with our student information system to pull our discipline monthly. And as ed directors look at it each month and then have those follow-up conversations with the school administrators who are, boots on the ground working with these families to look at, did we first appropriately issue discipline in each of these scenarios? And then also, how are we going to get out ahead of this to reduce these numbers? So we're going to be doing this rather than annually, monthly, to hopefully respond quicker and intervene when there's problems.
Good. So that's interesting. A lot of that work was happening this summer. Because, and this is one of the challenges, we're looking at a year in the rears. So we are looking at data and monitoring a year ago, but we want to know now also what is being implemented going forward to impact, especially in this particular area, with the disproportionality that we see, what is being done to make changes so that next year it doesn't look like this or doesn't look as much like this. So that's good to hear, and to morph both of these together, the looking in the past and looking forward. More, Director Muldrow.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I Heather and I think met with each of us kind of talking about our thoughts around discipline and things like that. And one of the things I mentioned is that the root word discipline actually means instruction and teaching. So having that, right, it's not punishment, which we very much have associated with it. It's actually, you can be a disciple in which somebody is teaching you. So discipline is around teaching and instruction. So I appreciate hearing from staff that we're trying to go after this mindset of meeting with individual students and families and doing that teaching and instruction of how we can be helpful, having a strength-based mindset during those conversations, I think are going to be important. And especially monitoring it monthly to be able to adjust. Are we really starting to see a key difference in building relationship and building community, so that, because discipline is misbehavior is always an acting out. And so what can we do to address the reason and the root cause of those acting out?
Well, and being able to look at it, much more quickly to see if the interventions or the work that's being done isn't working, right? Especially for those specific students that are being worked with to try to build this student, family, school relationship. Then, it just allows the opportunity to more quickly ramp up what the interventions are, and still in that vein of trying to be relationship building. Director Mullings?
I love engagement and relationship building, but maybe the thing I'm most wanting to learn more about, and maybe speaks more to what I think is at the core here, are the adult and system failures. So I think if we want to know, as we review kind of the flow of students, the flow of the day, the consistent locations of discipline issues, at what time of day, for me, those are the places that, in addition to the relationship building, are the most fruitful to look at. And my personal belief system is we have erred a lot on where we've made our first inroads. I don't mean to say it that way, but where we've made first inroads is on relationship, which is a positive step. I would encourage more in the realm of the operational realities in the schools. What is happening in what place, with what people, at what time of day, and what are the specific interventions that can and should be done in order to deflect, defer, reduce behaviors from occurring at all. And I think the more we can be introspective as a system, that we have opportunity in those spaces, the better off we'll be.
Okay. Any other thoughts? And I will ask for public comment if there isn't any other jumping out right now. Okay, let me ask for public comment and then we can come back to any other discussion. Is there any public comment from the room or the Zoom? Michelle Whitehead from the Zoom. And so if you'll turn on your video and unmute, there we go.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. I have a question about what you were speaking about earlier about the discipline. I want to know if the discipline data is separated by children who have special needs, or if this is just by children of color. Because the children who have been disciplined and are in special needs programs and services, they are treated differently and their suspensions are treated differently. And I wonder if you can define that and categorize that over what a special needs child's suspension looks like in the context of the discipline EL 11 that you're talking about. And I wanted to know if parents will have access to this data, if this would be public information we could request, and if it would be broken down by maybe ethnicity or special needs, special education. Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Does anybody else have any public input? If you have public input, you can go up to the microphone and make sure to state your name and the area of the district.
Larry White, I guess I'm, as I said, former employee of the district, but I was actually on the ground there at IMS and IHS, and I can tell you exactly what's going on there. And I can tell you about the problems with the students of color that were, where we're seeing that disproportionate amount. A lot of it relates to the fact they don't have people of color there in an authority role for them. One of the things that I was trying to do is I met with the LGBTQ group, the BSA, which was the Black Student Union group, trying to bring those groups together because I knew there was a lot of turmoil going at. I had an LGBTQ student pull a knife on a Black student. My first month working at the school. We had issues with locally. You talk about some of the issues on the relationship building. A lot of the kids were stealing from the Dollar Tree down at the corner near IMS. And so what I did is on my own time, I went down there and said, here is my business card. I'm the security officer at IMS. If you see any Issaquah Middle School kids in here and you think that they're stealing, let them know that you know Officer White. And with that, I actually had a mother thank me for doing that. She said, it's the greatest thing you did was showing up at the Dollar Tree because that was a problem. There were, our kids were causing some issues there. And, like I said, I was in the process of building those relationships and, that's I guess that's it.
Thank you very much for your comments.
All right.
Anyone else in the public? All right. Back to the board and superintendent.
Just want to say thank you. This was helpful. It is about the action that we're taking to address the biggest areas of opportunity and need in the system. And I'm very confident in our team in getting at that problem, and excited to, not excited about the problem, but I'm excited to see our direction change and shift and eliminate the disproportionality that currently exists.
All right, anything else from the board? All right, then all those, oh,
I'm really
sorry,
quick.
I looked
So, in the future, can you bring the suspension data to include students on disability? And I think we used to do low income, but I don't know if we have
Yes,
that.
yes. And just reminding people that there's overlap also with race and ethnicity. So
Right.
we can certainly do that.
Can you make that? I was just going to say that. Could you make that note? So that'll help her later when that goes to be made, the report generated for next year. Okay. All right, anything else? All right, then all those in favor of approval of the monitoring report EL 11 discipline, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that unanimously passes and we are good to go. Thank you for all the work on that. I know that was a big effort this year for that one. All right, we are now on to works in progress. Let us know what's happening.
All right, so I sent the board quite a lengthy update. I think that's what happens when you have 3 weeks in between board meetings instead of 2. So I'll be actually pretty brief right now, but it has been a busy past few weeks. In particular, this has been a sprint mode of engaging with folks, and it's kind of helping me conclude the first 100 days coming up pretty soon. And I do want to highlight a great visit I did with Executive Director of Elementary School, Susan Mundell, to visit Issaquah Valley Elementary and then see the dual language program, which I believe, is great work by Principal Vanessa Garcia and her team in leaning into this important model for linguistically diverse families, but also for affirming the identities and cultures for many of our students. So that was pretty powerful, and I'm looking forward to continuing to visit there. Preparing for the October 20th community forum, which will be about hearing directly from participants on several key questions in small groups. And the design of that time is really meant to foster inclusion and participation, from having Spanish and Mandarin interpreters, for example, already available, secured to be interpreters, and as well to put in place a protocol that allows that each participant's voice can be heard. Is an important aspect of that design in our efforts to hear from more people. And there will also be a simultaneously launched thought exchange to also gather input on the same exact question, so we can compare responses and get good, robust input. The questions include, would you tell us about a time when you felt really great about your student's school experience? Another question is, what do you want your child's life to look like as an ISD alum? Or really thinking about what their life is like after their time in K-12 education. And then some questions around what, based on each individual participant's experience, would they recommend the district start doing, the district stop doing, and what the district should continue to do, and consider that as well. So those are the questions. They're already publicized, so people can have enough think time to also, that's another strategy to maximize inclusion and give people preparation time to think about that as they engage. I understand that we have just under 30 people already registered. From my PTSA conversations, leadership conversations, I know that the push for scheduling and sort of RSVPing might happen the Monday before, so I'm expecting that to tick up early next week. A couple of updates from the Equity Department. The Equity Department put on a financial aid event on October 12th, and there were 55 people in attendance. The breakdown of that was there were 19 people in the English session, 13 people in the Spanish session, 12 people in the Mandarin session, and 15 people in the Korean session. And this session covered also how families are to who are undocumented can access financial aid for college, which is a very important aspect of providing educational awareness opportunities to all of our families. And there'll be a follow-up workshop later on November 9th to help families with filling out the financial aid applications. We had an all administrators meeting this week focused on our building leaders and their leadership in leading professional learning with their staff on the October non-student day. And as a reminder, there are going to be family conferences this fall in lieu of a report card at the elementary level. And families will receive report cards in March and June as in the past, and messages to reinforce this reminder will be going out very soon.
Thank you for that update.
Yep.
Any questions? All right, thank you. And now we are on to a discussion on middle school athletics. So we will let you and team lead us in this.
All right, I'm going to welcome back up Executive Director of Middle School, Sherry Cox. She'll be joined by Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Donna Hood, and Executive Director of Finance and Operations, Business Services, Mariah Benasek. But we'll defer to Sherry here as she kicks us off and shares a presentation with us.
Great. Well, good evening again, directors. My name is Sherry Cox, Executive Director, just one of me, of middle school education. I'm cloning myself. And I am, I'm here to try to come on, Stephen, you're making me look bad. It was working earlier. There we go. I'm here tonight to just share with you and discuss the athletic opportunities that we currently have available for our middle school students, and then take a deeper look at some of the data as we've presented it. And I know you've had an opportunity to take a look at it prior to tonight regarding gender, school, and sports that our students can participate in at the middle school level. In preparing for this presentation, I did a little dive into the middle school athletic handbook, which is available online. And it calls out that our philosophy is to recognize the unique development needs of middle level students, build student success through active participation, increased skill building, and positive sportsmanship. And then it goes on to say that it's about the participation, skill building, and sportsmanship. And I'm hoping that as we go through this, that I see some head nods that this is in fact what we still believe to be the purpose of our athletics program at the middle level. And so be thinking about that today as we continue through the slides. This first graph shows the 22-23 fall only number of teams, which include volleyball, which is a girls only sport, cross country, which is a co-ed sport, and a softball, which is a co-ed team as well. I do want to note that you don't see any lines representing boys teams because this fall there are no boys teams. Softball was originally intended as a boys sport. However, it is now open to both male and females in the absence of baseball teams. You're also going to see a similar trend that the number of boys teams in the whole school year of 2020-21 also is a smaller number on the graph. I also want to call something out that is important, I believe, to all of us, is that there is no, the data does not account for students that identify as non-binary. In fact, in the system that we use called Final Forms, it only allows for 2 gender options, boys or girls, which is problematic. Final Forms also pulls data from Skyward, and we've made a conscious choice here at the ISD to not have a non-binary box in our Skyward system. We have a blank option, and we tell staff who enter data not to use the blank box because it skews our data for federal reporting systems. One of the federal systems does not recognize the blank, and it will arbitrarily assign a gender to a student. So I see that as very problematic on many levels. One is that the state and federal reporting systems do that. And second is that we've made a choice not to mark our students as, or allow them the choice to be non-binary. So what's happening is that some person who's entering the data is assigning a gender to a student that may not align to how they identify themselves. And so I'm going to come at the end and talk about solutions that we have to working on some of these problems that are only tangentially related to middle school athletics. This is the 22-23 fall data that shows the overall number of student athletes on the teams. Again, the volleyball team, the cross country team, and the softball team. This data does represent unique students because it's just the current season that's happening. So every student who is signed up for this fall is represented one time on this data sheet as far as gender is concerned. However, they may be a student on an IEP and also a student who is in our ELL programming. So they may show up on those smaller numbers more than one time. We would hope to see that the students on IEPs and the students on 504s and the students receiving EL services would be representative of the percentage of students at each of these middle schools. We're not there, but it is something that by looking at the data, I became aware of this issue, and we can work together with the school programming folks to try to raise those numbers. This is the 21-22 data, the number of teams at each school by gender. And just a reminder that there are 4 sports seasons at the middle level. In the fall, again, there's volleyball, which is girls only, cross country, which is a co-ed, and softball, which is a co-ed sport. Winter 1, we have girls basketball and wrestling, which is co-ed. And then winter 2, we have basketball, boys only, and then soccer, which is girls only. And then in the spring, we have track. Note here that there are more girls teams than boys teams and co-ed teams. And this graph represents the number of athletes for the 21-22 school year. The final number of student athletes is 3,103, but a reminder that these are not unique students. So if I am a student who plays 4 sports, I'm going to show up 4 times at my school in the girl category. And we're going to work, one of the things that I hope to be able to do is to pull this data in a different way by working with the folks at Final Forms to allow us to do so. You'll also note that except for Beaver Lake, the number of girls that participate in athletics outnumbers boys at each of our schools. And again, as I had mentioned in the previous graph, we're not seeing the number of students represented equally for those students that are on IEPs, 504s, or receiving EL services. So that's an area of growth for us. This is the staffing that is used for middle school staffing allotments. And just I want to call out a couple of things is that our coaches are not represented staff in the Issaquah School District. They can be either classified or certificated staff, and they turn in timesheets to be paid if they're classified. We typically pay a higher total stipend than the Lake Washington and Renton school districts, but not as much as Kent because the Kent coaches are represented. The other thing I want to call out about our staffing that I think has been a misperception is that the staffing at the middle school for coaches, including intramural coaches, do not need to be middle school staff at that school. That it is open to anyone who passes all of the Issaquah School District background checks, etc. And then I think now we start to talk about some of the impacts that perhaps systems and structures have on the opportunity for our students to participate. This graph highlights the impact of available coaches on student opportunity to play volleyball. You'll note that students at Beaver Lake, Pacific, Cascade, and Pine Lake middle schools were cut from the volleyball team because there were no applicants to coach the intramurals. This graph also shows that the coaches at each building determine the number of students that they kept on the team. For example, Beaver Lake kept 26 students, Pacific Cascade kept 24 students, and Pine Lake kept 27 students after the cuts. This is a systems issue that we can fix now that we know it exists. Coaches are usually this, as I already mentioned that, they're usually the staff at the school, but it's not a requirement. The 3 schools that do have intramural coaches, though, those are staff at the school. And while I only displayed volleyball, you would see similar data patterns for last year's basketball teams and soccer teams throughout the district. And now I'm going to turn it over to Don.
Thank you, Sherry. Assistant Superintendent Donna Hood, Human Resources. In August, we do open final forms so that students can begin to register. So we actually transitioned to final forms when I was still the exec director of high schools. And we used this platform. And at the very beginning, we were a little nervous about opening all sports in August, not sure exactly how it would play out. Were we going to crash the system? What was going to happen with the predictability of student enrollment for those sports? And it's actually gone very well. And we found it's a very lovely convenience for students and parents, especially those who know what their kids are going to do and just want to get it all done at one time in August. It's been much more user-friendly, very also phone-friendly for those who may not be sitting at a desktop computer, for example, and wanting to register instead over the phone. On the Friday before each season then begins, we close the window to enter the data then for that specific sports season. There's some cutoffs and some timelines. But again, all folks can start registering in August and could potentially register for every sport they want to do that year. Then the ADs at the high schools or the assistant principals at the middle schools monitor the number of students who are signing up so they can see real-time data and kind of predict where it's going to go. And this is where some of our more seasoned folks have a sense as they're watching the numbers. Okay, this is what I think is going to happen. As they get the student numbers, so for example, if there's a new team and they have students who would warrant another coach, we want them to physically show up so that we know they are not just registered electronically, but also intending to play. And then when they physically show up, we can begin to hire a coach. Sometimes what we have done is authorized a volunteer through our volunteer background check and had a person volunteering. And then when we know the team is now stable and the students are in fact physically showing up, then we can also hire them on as a coach and potentially pay them for the time they'd already invested in the team. So that is one solution we have used in the past to help us in that gap stop period without sacrificing any student safety, of course.
So as I have called out throughout the presentation, I just want to really to call this out, that what's limiting opportunity for our students in middle school right now is coaches, the availability of coaches. So with Martin and Donna, we've talked about looking at the review the hiring, the 10-day hiring rule, and we want to do better job recruiting and outreach. If cuts do become necessary, I'd like to take a look at and require coaches to keep the same number of teams at each middle school. There's no reason why one middle school kept 27 and another one kept 24. And that's not a huge difference, but for those 3 students, it's a huge difference. The data that you saw today was pretty difficult to pull. It took a lot of staff looking at one data source to pull it into another data source. And there can be human error in there, which I believe you saw on the first set of data that was sent to you. And so we want to continue to work and train staff on final forms to be sure that when we present data to anyone, that it's accurate data. And then one of the other things is to gather the unique student data so that when you're looking at data, you're not going to see the same student showing up 4 different times. And then the last thing that I had mentioned was the misgendering of students on final forms, and also even kind of more systemic level, the allowing our students who identify as non-binary to select that as an option for their gender in Skyward as well. And so I just want to first offer myself to any questions that you might have, and then I'd love to know, like, are we aligned on purpose and philosophy of our middle school athletic programs? And if we're not, I'd like to hear your thoughts about it and what you think we should do differently as we move forward.
All right, thank you very much for taking us through the information that had been sent. Is there anything you'd like to add before I turn it over to the board to ask questions or discuss?
I just want to say thank you to Sherry for bringing this forward in this way tonight for us to engage in a very important topic as it relates to access and opportunity for middle school athletics, and to Donna and her team, Carlina specifically, and Mariah, and Tom and Martin for pulling together and looking at the information collectively as we were making sense of that. We do have additional budget and capital project information as needed, but because of our focus on the coaching need, right, and some of these other additional systems, things that we need to think about, we want to just sort of pause there and make sure we got feedback on alignment of our philosophy and purpose for middle school athletics, and then what this sparks for you about suggestions, ideas, or wonderings.
All right, I'll toss it over to the board. Anybody want to start? Director Bowlings.
Yeah, it's very helpful conversation. And I guess I just want to get some clarity. I understand the limitation of coaches, and I have a couple questions about that, but when we look at other factors, any facility differences, I guess physical plant sort of differences, equipment, do we assume that those are all equal and then coaching is the sole differentiator at the middle level of what we can offer in what school, or is that given to us as like the main driver?
There are no differences. I mean, I'm gonna lean over and look at Tom. In our facilities, as far as our gym spaces go, in our athletic fields, at first, we thought we were not going to have a softball field at Cougar Mountain, so we made arrangements with the local parks to, but in fact, we do have a softball field now at Cougar Mountain. So Tom, give me a thumbs up. To my understanding, all of our facilities are exactly the same for middle schools.
And we didn't get into fees at all. So are all sports, are there any fees for students or fully free at middle?
There are fees.
And are those equal across schools?
That's I'm getting a thumbs up
Thumbs
from
up.
Jason Morse in the back. Thank you. I have a great team back there.
Okay, can I keep going to my coach
Oh,
question?
yes, go ahead.
Okay. Because that was just want to make sure that I wasn't.
Yeah,
Not
thank
hearing
you. I mean,
another.
if anyone else sees other possible root causes, please bring them to our attention, because we may have blind spots to them, or we may have an answer that why we don't think that's a problem.
Awesome. And so on the coach question, and now I don't remember, maybe it's this document I'm looking at right now. So it was specifically in some of these it lists like no, like wrestling coach, but no intramural coach. So what is practically the difference? Because don't our middle schools only play each other anyway? So I'm not sure why we separate intramural from not intramural at the middle level.
That's a great question. And Director Moore asked me a similar question the other day on the phone. So I think those of us who know sports understand the high school a little bit better, where we have the varsity team, the JV
Right.
team, and the intramural team would be kind of considered the C team. And so for schools that have huge participation and turnout, if they can hire an intramural coach for some sports, we allow that to happen. It's a shorter season, and there are no cuts to it. So it's a little bit, it's less competitive.
Because that's what I'm trying to get to is the no cut.
Mhm.
So I'm going to no cut next. So I should look at intramural as a no
Mhm.
cut.
Correct.
version.
The
Intramural
limitation is the coaching.
is the coaches.
No, I
Okay.
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
get that. And as a,
And there are other sports though who don't have cuts, like cross country, for example, track. They take a infinite number of middle school students to make those teams.
So I guess at middle, what I would like to understand that maybe I'm not seeing here is it's a bit mixed in, is what percentage of the offerings are skilled players who are selecting for skill versus no cut? And I will just replace intramural with no cut in my mind for now, which I prefer, because it's all intramural, frankly. And I guess what I'd ultimately like to understand is if that is a limiting factor, or if that is our concern around students who receive special services. Because to me today, that's not super clear of what is the total opportunity for no cut sports within the school.
So what drives the cut besides the coaching is the size of the team. So our cut sports are volleyball, basketball, and soccer are primarily the sports that have cuts because there are only so many students on a team at one time. And so it typically drives a cut because it's hard to supervise. If only 5 girls are playing at one time and you've got 25 girls on the bench, it becomes a bit of a supervision issue. And so the non-cut sports are the more individual sports. Cross country is non-cut. Softball is sorry, I forgot to mention softball is a cut, and they do have, they keep making teams is what they do with softball. It's a little bit different. Wrestling is not cut and track is a non-cut sport.
Can I add in a question while
Please.
you're still mulling? And this has to a little bit to do with the intramural, and it has been a long time since I've had kids in the middle school. So if we talk about kind of 3 levels of teams, our middle school teams play our other middle schools, or at least they did at my time. They do. Do the intramural kids play against other schools, or is it primarily within their school? I was just trying to understand the difference.
I'm going to look to my friend Jason Morris, but my understanding is that they do play the other schools in the district. Is that correct? Oh, he's coming up.
Thank you for the question. Jason Morse, Exec Director of Operations and former Exec Director of Middle Schools. Our intramural teams have traveled but they also play internally because sometimes schools don't have a team. And so if, for example, 2 schools in the league had enough student interest for a team or the coaches for a team, that they would play each other twice and then that's it. So what we've done in the past is they play each other, but then we arrange for inter squad games to try to get more opportunities for the students.
Okay.
So it kind of varies depending on the sport and how many teams we have. We try to get as many of those opportunities for the students as possible.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I can tell you that right now, the 3 volleyball teams that do have intramural teams are not traveling. They've made a choice because only 3 of the 6 have them. They're just going to play inter-school team games.
Okay, against other teams at their school. Okay, thank you. Keep going.
I guess maybe if I just get back to the old, at some point, we're cutting based on skill because of size-ish, give or take. And then we are also then limiting which sports kids can play that they have a full opportunity to participate in an intramural case. And then we're again limiting what their experience is because we don't have intramural teams at all schools. So I guess I am, and maybe if I get back to your Uber point, which is the coaching question, is it really philosophical, to your point about are we aligned on philosophy? And I guess what I'd like to align on philosophically is that our goal is to provide a full experience, which is to get to compete fully, regardless of skill level across sports in the district. And so I feel like based on all of those cuts of limitation, that's actually not where we end up. So how do we philosophically align to what is the opportunity to fully participate, right? If I never in middle school get on the bus and have the thrill of going to the other school and the thrill of competing against the kid in the other uniform, I will embrace sport differently. And I say that as a sports parent and as having played sports. And so how do we practically create an environment that all of the kids get to have that experience in the school? And then we back up to, so then what are the offerings? But it seems we're going the opposite direction.
I don't know if we're going in the opposite direction per
I mean,
se.
in the opposite
I-
direction from progress. I mean,
Oh.
we're staffing the other way. We're starting with filling the teams, which creates the opportunity that kids get to then execute on.
There are some coaching positions that we know we will have at each school each year. It's when there's a new team that might be added or created that we're really closely watching those physical numbers. So there are some that we just know are going to exist, and we plan both financially and otherwise to staff those. One thing I should have mentioned earlier too, when we know that a new team is forming, we do post internally to all ISD staff, both cert and classified, and that then triggers HR staff to also post externally. So we try to do them within hours of each other if we're all, on it and not occupied with other tasks, but within 24 hours. It's also posted externally to try to get volunteers interested and other applicants too.
I totally get that. I'm just calculating as the mom of 2 athletes. My kids get to can play every sport on the list every time, every semester, every year. They get that full experience. Right? How many other kids get to say that because mine happen to have athletic abilities? I guess that's what I'm trying to get to. And so is there a place or a way that we can say, if that's an experience kids want to have, that we can create that environment, and that we may have to say yes, and that will always be track and cross country, and that's the answer. But I just, at least from the way I heard the description, it sounds like that is not, that we started a slightly different place.
I mean, there are opportunities for every student who wants to participate in some sports. That is correct. There are other sports, due to the size of the team, that if we don't get an intramural coach, they will be cut. And the intramural teams are a different experience than the other team. And so the one piece of data that I don't have in front of me that your question leads me to want to have is how many kids, and the other thing a little bit tricky about the data is that sometimes kids, in fact, I believe Donna Hood shared with me, her kid did that. They sign up in final forms saying that they want to play basketball, but they never go out for the team. And so some of the data might come down a little bit as far as those cuts go. I don't expect it would come down a great deal, but what I don't know is how many students signed up in each of these cut sports and didn't make the team. So, and how many of them are unique students, so that maybe I'm not the greatest volleyball player, but I'm a really good basketball player. So I didn't make the volleyball team, but I did have the experience that you're explaining to play on the basketball team. And I didn't, that's a data point that I think is worthy of us trying to figure out.
Dr. Weaver?
Was Jason about
Oh,
to say something?
I don't know.
Yeah, could I add just one piece to that? A practice that we have had with the different levels of coaching. So for example, wrestling starts out with 2 coaches, a head coach and an assistant coach. And when they get to 50 wrestlers, they add another coach because supervision, more kids, the like. That is true for track, cross country, any of our sports that are non-cut. I just wanted to mention that we do start the season off in the new season based on the number of students we had and number of coaches we had last year. So take, for example, if we had 70 wrestlers, 80 wrestlers at a middle school, and they had 4 coaches, we would expect to start that next season off with that number of coaches, because we're kind of seeing a trend there that the wrestling turnout is higher at a certain school versus another school. So we do try to use the previous counts to project forward how many cross country, how many track coaches we're going to need to accommodate the number that have signed up. So it's not like we're seeing that number for brand new and having to go out and get coaches. We start off, some of our schools start off with 6, 7, 8 track coaches ready to go for that season. So just a point of clarity.
I wanted to put back this slide, just so we could ground ourselves in the philosophy. Not that we were steering away from it, but it's helpful to reflect back as we engage. What we're looking for is additional, and this has been helpful because it's achieving, I think, one of the purposes, which is to get input. This is not a conversation we brought forward in this way, I believe, to the board in recent years, if ever. So as we consider access and opportunity through that lens, this is our first starting point of what I expect to be multiple conversations throughout the year, potentially looking at different levels of participation in our athletic program and activities, especially also for second 9-12. So given that, I don't know if there's additional comments to sort of help provide input and sort of as we go forward on this topic. And I appreciate Sherry bringing forward the highest impact opportunities and stating that there are system things we can do. There are systems things we can do, which actually mirrors our conversation on EL 11 to Director Mullins. Comments.
I think the only other thing I want to call out quickly is that when I look at the numbers of a particular sport, and I'm not going to name it now, I wonder if it's the right sport for middle school because the numbers of participation are very low and it's one of the non-cut areas. And so thinking about, is there another sport during that season that we have this physical space for that would garner more interest from our middle school students? And I'll just leave it at that and take your comments.
Dr. Weaver.
Okay, I just have a couple of really basic questions here because I want to be sure I understand the data that I'm looking at. So if I look at volleyball at Cougar Mountain, 97 girls turned out for volleyball and 97 girls are playing volleyball. And at Pacific Cascade, 110 girls turned out and 24 are playing. Now, is that because we just didn't have the coaches, or is that because an assistant principal made a decision that?
That's because they tried to hire an intramural coach and no one was interested.
Okay. And then my second question would be at Cougar Mountain, where we have 97 playing, are they all just playing randomly, or is there like an A team, a B team, a C team?
Yep, there's an
Oh, no,
eight.
I
There's an
wasn't a
eight.
sports parent.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're just like I had explained, think of it ABC or varsity, junior varsity, and then a C team.
Okay, so we are segregating by skill.
majors,
And
the
then
minors,
presumably in the case where
farm
we
club.
only had 24, somebody decided those were the 24 best players?
That is an assumption that I would make as well.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't talk to the coach, but that's typically how,
Right.
as a former coach, that is how cuts happen, is you typically pick your strongest athletes.
I mean, that was the only piece of the data that was really glaring, is that the North End schools had one team and the Central South End schools had as many teams as they needed. And
Right.
it was just,
Right.
kind of
Well, those
bizarre.
North End teams had 2 teams for those 24 kids. There were 2 teams.
okay, okay,
Right.
fine.
And so they had like the A and the B, but
Yeah.
what they didn't have is the intramural.
And they didn't have nearly as many teams as they had kids who
Right.
indicated a desire to play.
Right.
Correct.
Which I kind of get at high school, but it seems like at middle school, we're all about participation. So, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I just wanted to be sure that I had clarity around that. I did have a kid who wrestled for like a season and a half, but other than that, we didn't really do sports at my house.
Mhm. Right. It's really about creating the opportunity for kids to be participants. And, taking a look at, the timing and the outreach to find the coaches is an important element. And, some of this, especially when it's the intramural, I think when my kids played volleyball at the middle school, they were on the intramural team because we were
But that's okay.
but that was
That's
okay
fine.
because
That's
that's what they were looking for, is simply the ability to build skill in it and to participate in the sportsmanship of being on a team. To them, I don't think it was as important to go and play against other schools as just being able to participate in something with other kids.
Yeah, and I do want to call out my Beaver Lake friends because Andrew, the assistant principal, who's the athletic director, came up with a creative solution. They couldn't hire an intramural coach. His head coach and his assistant coach are interested in doing the intramurals, but they can't do it at the same time. So those coaches are offering to do the intramural season a slightly different time so that those girls can have an opportunity to participate. So there are creative solutions.
Creative
That's a workaround.
solutions. Okay, I like that. Right.
Thank
Think
you.
outside that box. Anything else, Director Maldo?
I just really wanted to say that twice this evening, you have talked about system and adult problems. And I have waited 13 years to have people come up here and say, my first priority is where are the system and adult problems? Because so many things have really been adult problems that end up hitting kids. So I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome. And you'll never hear me say anything except that this is a systems and a structure problem because none of our kids are broken and none of our adults are broken, but our systems need some work. So thank you.
All right, well,
This is really great data, by the way. I just wanted to say that thank you because I'm sure this wasn't
right.
easy to put together. So
Mhm.
wanted to
But-
throw that
but
out there.
A good view into what's happening, which allows you all to take a look at it and look for changes and then, reevaluate and look at this again to see, if there's been any positive, hopefully positive impact on creating more opportunities for kids here. All right. All right. Thank you very much for that conversation. I think that was really helpful. All right, we are moving on to legislative matters. I know Director Gallinger is not here today, so, and he didn't give me any kind of a report, other than I know that he did submit to WASDA our legislative priorities after legislative conference. So that did get submitted on our behalf by him. Director Maldo, do you have anything that you would add from your WASDA NSBA work?
Not more than Legislative Assembly was interesting. And so he and I tag teamed that work. He last minute realized that the system that they used would not allow him to use his mobile phone to be the delegate because he was a delegate for something with the doctors. So he's down in San Francisco. So I ended up being your delegate. I hope I voted the way I was supposed to. Pretty much followed many of my colleagues in the King County area. I did learn that there are school directors that don't understand the idea of a weighted vote. That was fun.
Oh.
Like, your 3 small districts calling for a weighted vote is not going to help you. But I think one of the things that because it's virtual and we didn't have a way of writing down the results, there was no way for me to go back and if I missed the results of a vote, it was gone. So I've asked that WASDA provide us with information about how a vote went in the long run. Because I think that is important data to really kind of know how far askew, how controversial are some of these issues that are coming forward. And so I thought that was interesting. And most of it is anytime we use the word equity, I think is the one that is concerning for some groups. And then anything that has to do with additional funding, like funding models, I think is concerning for small districts. What is that going to do to our tax base? And we try to, console them. And trust me, King County's paying for that.
All right, thank you very much for that.
On legislation, I just happened to glance at the notes from our last meeting and realized that Director Gallinger scheduled several legislative meetings that are going to happen before our next meeting, but I don't actually have calendar invites or information about where I have times, but I don't know exactly where they're being held. And I'm pretty sure that he was working on a fact sheet or something for us to speak off of. And I guess he's probably going to attend all those meetings. I don't want to go in by myself.
Right.
Because I don't know what I'm doing exactly.
Right.
So
I know from the last meeting, his plan was to do it with whoever was doing
Yeah.
it with him. So there would be
and I'm
two.
happy to do that, but I just realized that those are coming
Yeah.
up before the next meeting. And it would be nice to get the i's dotted and t's crossed.
Well, I can shoot off an email to,
We are in motion of getting the fact sheet ready.
oh, good.
There's exchange
perfect.
between Director Gallagher and Dr. Dana Bailey and Martin Turney.
Okay.
So that's in motion. The first one does not start until the 19th. So I think it's just a matter of probably figuring out the schedule and getting invites out. for
Okay.
who's Attending. which
No,
one.
I just realized I was looking at that and then I realized they weren't on my calendar and I
Thank
don't
you.
want to accidentally not show up.
Well, you're just gonna have to write them on your own calendar.
Thank you.
Well, no, and I can do
We're gonna
that.
get a
I
calendar
just,
invite
like
for
I
this.
said, I don't, are they here? Are
Oh.
they at another
They're,
location?
they're at a variety of different locations. So
Okay,
with
that's
the
the part I
invite
needed to
will be the location.
Okay.
We have the information based on the last discussion of where people could be flexible, where people have constraints on the possible options. So we'll just need to match that up and resolve it.
Yeah, so I guess that would be a good thing.
As I said, I figured that was all being handled, but I just needed to throw it out there to make sure I show up in the right place at the right time.
I can send an email to Director Gallinger and just ask that he reach out, because I know I did, none of those dates worked for me, so I wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
down
I'm
for
pretty
any of
sure I
those
said
meetings.
yes to the 27th. Yeah.
And I said yes to the 19th with Representative Sen and Representative Tai.
Okay, good. All right. So we can kind of get an update on that and those dates in the fact sheet. Okay. All right. All right, next, does anybody have any announcements or correspondence to add?
I did have one from the Central Washington University. Unfortunately, I was not able to make the advisory meeting today. But of course I had it in front of me and now where is it? They are having two events at the CWU Sammamish facility. A sustainability and action lecture is on October 17th. And then they're on the November 7th, they're having a panel that's featuring representatives from PSE, local city government, and the CWU faculty, again, around sustainability. So they have two events coming up, and I can forward the flyer if you want to get that out to the community that you're in, if they're interested. I know we have a lot of members of our community that are interested in sustainability.
Sure, go ahead and
So-
pass it on. That'd be great. Anything else?
I do have one.
All right.
I don't know why that reminded me, but it did. So I'm forwarding to you right now, Diane. So I was invited to, I think it's the first of its kind. So the Washington State Commission on African American Affairs invited me to a meet and greet for Black elected officials in the state of Washington. It's in December. So I did get invited to that.
Good. All right. All right, if nothing else, okay, then on to calendar and future agenda topics. I was just going to remind everybody, we have the Holly Street Early Learning Center dedication, October 26th from 2:30 to 4:30. And then that same day, we have the WASDA Region 2 meeting, which I think is like in the High Line area, but anyway, in SeaTac. It's from 6 to 9, so we can make some sort of a plan to maybe head on down there together. We can carpool down, and then we have the town hall on November 2nd at 7 p.m. at Maywood. And then I'm just going to throw out there that maybe it's time for us to schedule a retreat day in the January, February time. So I'll take a look at that and see if I can work to throw out some dates and see if we can pencil something in that time window. But other than that, that's all I had on my list of things to remind everybody about. Anything else?
I had one reminder on calendar, which is Director Weaver, Director Butlings, and Director Moore have let me know about the conference opportunity for ASU GSV Summit, which is in April. Director Gallagher had expressed interest, but wanted to know more about some of the timing pieces of the programming and the duration of that time. So we have a little bit of time to respond. So I want to make sure Director Moraldo has an opportunity to look at the opportunity and let us know about her indication interest. But Issaquah School District, specifically me, got several scholarships to share. And so there are 5 scholarships specifically that I want to offer the board to defray the cost, not only of registration, but also of lodging. And then I have, we'll share some with our team, and I have some other folks in my network that I, because of my prior attendance there and scholarship awards, have also been offering them opportunities for. So just would love to know that very soon, and we'll go from there. It's a good opportunity.
Great, thank you. All right, that is a good opportunity. It's a nice connection to have, and it's very nice that it's a scholarship of both the registration and the lodging for the board. Thank you for that. All right, then that's all I have. So with that,
I did forget during the announcement piece. There was one other piece when you asked about NSBA. I don't know why I
Oh, you
didn't
mean
say
during
this.
legislation?
Yeah, no, for the
Oh, no.
announcement.
Oh.
So last week, I think it was last week, it feels like a year ago, the NSBA belongs to the Learning First Alliance. And we are leading a campaign that was initiated back on the 4th called Here for the Kids campaign. And so the president of NSBA, Frank Henderson, was the first to speak at that to open up the campaign. And then I was by video able to provide just a little bit of input and then forward on to they played a video from Pomona Unified School District about engaging communities. But what was really important for me is that my portion was about the importance of parents and parent engagement and parent partnerships with schools. So if you want to see, if you go to the learningfirst.org under their news section, it's hashtag Here for the Kids campaign that we launched.
Thank you for doing that. It was a good opportunity for you and for them to hear from you. Great. All right. Anything else? All right, then we will adjourn tonight's meeting.